All right, so this is a person's chin here, and that's their neck. And this right here is a stoma. It's an opening into their trachea. That's where they breathe. They breathe through that. So how do we use this to breathe for the patient? Well, basically the mouth is no longer useful. So you want to attach a BVM. Sometimes there's a little tube area, or kind of a tube thing. I'll pretend that that's the tube there. But basically like a little port into the stoma. You're going to attach the BVM to that. Or the other option is if you don't have a tube in place, like in this case, you'll use an infant or child mask to make a seal over the stoma. Occasionally the mouth or nose may have some connectivity to the trachea still, so you may have to seal those off if that happens when you're ventilating the stoma. If you can't ventilate the stoma, then you need to try suctioning the stoma or the trach tube. And then if it's still not working, seal off the stoma. You can do that with like a gloved hand. And attempt to ventilate through the mouth or nose. Sometimes these come with a cap too, so you can ask if the patient has a cap for it. A few special considerations for infants and children. Place the infant's head in a neutral position. And for a child's head, extend the child's head slightly past neutral and avoid excessive hyperextension. The other thing here with the infants is pad under the shoulders. And same thing with kids really, but infants really need it. And this is for both of them. That's going to be helpful for you. Avoid excessive hyperextension of the neck. So you want to make sure that your neck's not too kind of pulled back in that head tilt chin lift. Avoid excessive ventilation. This is a big deal. We've already talked about the problems with excessive ventilation in adults, and they're even worse in kids. So just make the chest rise. Gastric distension is much more common in children, and don't use BVMs with pop-off valves. Dentures. If your patient has dentures, you want to actually leave them in place if they're in there solidly, because it's going to help you make a better mask seal. Better mask seal. If they're loose, then take them out and be prepared to remove them if the displacement occurs. So kind of have a plan in place of if they end up displaced, you got to be able to reach in and get them out. So a little bit about oxygen. It's a gas. It's odorless, colorless, and tasteless. It's naturally occurring in the atmosphere. About 21% oxygen in the atmosphere. The rest is nitrogen. Ugh. So when we take a breath of just the air that's around us, about 21% of what we breathe in is oxygen, and basically the rest is nitrogen, which I'll abbreviate N2. So it used to be, and you'll probably still run into some people who say that everybody needs oxygen, just give all of your patients oxygen. Well, that used to be the thinking. We used to think that way, but some recent research that has come out suggests that oxygen can form what are called free radicals. And these free radicals are, they're angry little things, and they kill cells. So for example, somebody who's having a heart attack, it used to be that one of the first things he did was give him oxygen. But it turns out that wasn't helping him as much as we thought, and in some cases it was actually hurting people. So we no longer give oxygen freely. We want to actually assess our patient's need for oxygen, and we're going to do that with a pulse ox. So SP, and that should be a lowercase p, O2, is the fancy abbreviation for pulse oximetry, which we'll talk about in another lecture. Oops. I'm really struggling to write today. Oximetry. Pulse oximetry, METRY. And that's measured in as a percentage. 100% is as high as it'll read, and it'll read low. It'll read all the way down into the kind of the 50s. But I'll be honest, if your patient's in the 50s, they're going to be blue and probably not breathing. So that's really bad. We like to try and keep it around 94 to 95%. If your patient, while breathing the air that's around us, is at least 94%, then don't worry about giving them oxygen. If they're below 94%, or if they're 94% or below, I guess, that's when you want to hook them up to just a little bit of oxygen. You just want to get them over that hump, and you don't want to give them too much. So oxygen is compressed. It's compressed and then put into these little cylinders here, and they're all sorts of different sizes. D cylinders are fairly common. They didn't include the K cylinder, which is the one that's actually used on more ambulances. But they're all different letters. They're tiny ones, they're big ones, and they hold different amounts of gas. So the D tanks tend to be the ones that are carried on the ambulances in the bags, and then the ambulances are generally equipped with the K tanks as well. And so they hold, oh gosh, probably 6,000 liters or so. But they hold a lot of oxygen. The contents is under pressure, and they should always be positioned to prevent falling and to prevent blows to the valve gauge assembly. So it's the regulator isn't on here, but there's usually a little thing, and it's got a little thing over here and a little round gauge that tells you how much oxygen is left. And you don't want to smack that or hit it off. So how much flow do we get? Well, you're going to figure out the duration of oxygen flow. So how long do I have left? How long can I give my patient five liters per minute of oxygen, given what the gauge says? So you're going to read the gauge pressure, and that's going to be in PSI, which is pounds per square inch. And that's going to be usually, maybe like 1,000 or 2,000. 2,000 is usually about full. 1,000 is about halfway. Your safe residual is going to be, you don't want to give your patient, basically your tank is done once it reaches 200. So we'll say your gauge pressure reading is 1,000 PSI minus your safe residual, which is 200, times a constant. Let's say you're using a D tank, so the constant is 0.16. And this is in parentheses, that's an important thing. Divided by your flow rate. Now, I didn't really make this easy on myself. Let's make this 1,200. There we go, that's easy. All right, so that means I have 1,000 times 0.16. All I have to do is move the decimal over. 1, 2, 3. So I have 160 divided by 5. Which is 32. Okay. So that's going to be 32 minutes. Did I do that right? I did. 32 minutes of oxygen. So if I have a pressure of 1,200 in a D tank, and I'm using a flow rate of 5 liters per minute, that's going to give me 32 minutes worth of oxygen. Now, did I ever use this? Not really. But I'll be honest, my transport times were pretty quick, usually 20 minutes or so. Now, I did always check to make sure that I had extra oxygen tanks available to me in the back of the truck on the way to the hospital. Sometimes the tanks are kept outside the truck. They're kept in the outside compartment, and you can't access them from the inside. That's kind of a problem if you have a patient who needs oxygen. So if you have long transport times, it may be useful for you to use this to figure out how much oxygen you have left.